Welcome back to Faith in Question. Today we're diving into contradictions in the Bible, but not the ones you've heard 100 times. These are the ones that Christians are afraid you'll bring up because they don't have a strong way to explain them away. And trust me, by the time we get to number 5, you might start questioning everything you thought you knew. But before we get there, let me ask you, if the Bible is the perfect inerrant Word of God, why do these contradictions exist? Well, stick around, because this might get a little bit uncomfortable. Let's get right into it. Contradiction number 1, who told David to number Israel? Here's a strange one. If you know your Old Testament, you've probably read the story of David taking a census of Israel. But here's the question, who actually told him to do it? 2 Samuel 24 and verse 1 says, "And again the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, 'Go, number Israel and Judah.'" So it was God. Well, not so fast, because 1 Chronicles 21 verse 1 tells a completely different story. It says, "And Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel." Wait a minute. Was it God or was it Satan? These are two separate accounts of the same event, but the instigator changes completely. And that's not a minor detail. That's the entire motivation behind the story. So which one is it? Moving on to contradiction number 2. Can you see God and live? We've all heard it. No one can see God and live, right? That's what Exodus 33:20 tells us. "Thou canst not see my face, for there shall no man see me and live." Sounds pretty final. But then we look back at Genesis 32 and verse 30, where Jacob wrestles with a divine being and says, "For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved." So hold on, did Jacob just break the rules? If no one can see God and live, how did Jacob not only survive, but also walk away and tell the story? It makes you wonder, and this contradiction wasn't even two different authors. It was Moses, and he couldn't make up his mind. Next, we'll look at contradiction number 3. Who killed Goliath? This one might change the way you see a story you've known since you were a child. We all know that David killed Goliath. That's one of the most famous Bible stories of all time. But did he? 1 Samuel 17 and verse 50. It says, "So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him." That's pretty clear, right? But then, 2 Samuel chapter 21 and verse 19, again, the same author, throws us a pretty crazy curveball. "And there was again a battle in Gob with the Philistines, where Elhanan, the son of Jerogorogram," how are you supposed to say this? Elhanan, the son of it's not getting any better.
Jarioregim.
"A Bethlehemite slew Goliath the Gittite." Wait, what? Some translations try to fix this by adding "the brother of" before Goliath's name, but here's the problem. That's not what the Hebrew says. It just says that Elhanan killed Goliath. So did David kill Goliath, or did someone else? And if it's okay to add clarifying details to your translation of the Bible, including the King James Version, what else might be misrepresented? Let's move forward to contradiction number 4. How did Judas die? Now, here's one that's been debated for centuries. Matthew 27:5 says Judas hanged himself. Acts chapter 1, verse 18, on the other hand, says, "Now this man purchased a field with the reward of iniquity, and falling headlong, he burst asunder in the midst, and all his bowels gushed out." Hold on. Which one happened? Did he hang himself, or did he fall and explode? Those are two very different stories, and there's more. Matthew says the priest took the silver Judas returned and bought the field after his death, but Acts says Judas himself bought the field. So did he buy the field or did the priest? And why does his cause of death change depending on who's telling the story? Now I can already hear the Christians in the comments.
It's common sense. Judas hung himself, and then days later the body became bloated with decay and fell to the ground and burst open.
You're making some pretty big assumptions here. How do you know that Judas hung himself in a field? Matthew doesn't say that. Acts doesn't even hint that Judas was hung. Something is very off here, but we can't spend all day here because we need to get to contradiction number 5. Where did Jesus' disciples see him first? This one hits at the core of Christianity, the resurrection, and there are a ton of contradictions here, but the most damning of them all, in my opinion, is this one. The Gospels can't agree on when the disciples actually saw Jesus. Matthew 28, 16 and 17 says they saw him in Galilee. Then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee, into a mountain where Jesus had appointed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Sounds straightforward, right? But then we have Luke 24, which says that they saw him that same evening in Jerusalem. And they rose up the same hour and returned to Jerusalem and found the 11 gathered together. And as they thus spake, Jesus himself stood in the midst of them. So was it days later in Galilee? Or was it the same night in Jerusalem? This isn't just a small detail. It's the resurrection. It's the entire foundation of Christianity. And the accounts don't even match. Oh, and by the way, if you want to check the original manuscripts for this time period in the other synoptic gospel, the book of Mark, you won't find anything there. Mark originally ended in verse 8 with the women running away from the tomb, and it wasn't until 100 years later that the story of Jesus visiting the disciples and the Great Commission were added to the book of Mark. But we'll talk more about that one next week. So those are 5 lesser-known contradictions in the Bible that your Christian friends are not going to be able to easily explain. And just to show you how common these contradictions are, I'm going to give you a bonus. Here are 5 more quick ones. Number 1, did David's first wife Michal have children? 2 Samuel 6 says no, but 2 Samuel 21 says she had 5 sons. Number 2, did Jesus bring peace or division? Matthew 10 says he brings a sword. John 14 says he gives peace. Number 3, how many animals did Noah take on the ark? Genesis 6 says 2 of every kind, but Genesis 7 says 7 of the clean animals. Number 4, who was Joseph's father? Matthew chapter 1 says Jacob. Luke chapter 3 says Heli. And number 5, how many times did the rooster crow? Matthew 26 says once, and Mark 14 says twice. And I could give you another 100 of these, but you get the point. So, what do we do with these contradictions? Christians still argue that the Bible is the perfect, inerrant Word of God, but when faced with contradictions, they tend to do one of 3 things. They ignore what the text actually says, they insert ideas that aren't there to fix the problem, or they say their favorite word, context, and then selectively decide when to take something literally or not. Now, some admit the contradictions, but claim the Bible was written by fallible humans who were still inspired by God. But here's the problem. The Bible itself claims to be perfect. So which is it? Perfect and inerrant, or flawed and human? What do you think? Have you heard these contradictions before? Or do you know of others that more people should know about? Put those in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you next time on Faith in Question.